Good evening. I am Tony Dattino and the founder of the USA Memory Championship and doing my Friday Night Live with Tony broadcast. And I'm picking up a message I was doing on Wednesday of this week that was coming out of the latest issue of the Harvard Health Newsletter. Let me see if I can get this. Harvard Health Newsletter. And it was an article, two parts. I was talking about the opening editorial being given by the editor-in-chief, where he was saying is we are just beginning to understand the physical and chemical connections that occur in our brains when memories are formed and recalled. So he was basically like, wow, we're just beginning to uncover what goes on in our brains that help us to encode and be able to retain and then bring those memories back. So I did that broadcast on Wednesday. If you want to know more about that, go back and pick that up. But the second part of it that I thought was significant and certainly was worth talking about was then coming forward with a cognitive neurologist, and he came to what were some of the cues. So how can we have things that we are trying to remember, retain? How do we cue those so that when we need to, we can retain them and then encode them and recall them when we need to do that? And as I read through the cues to memory, I think about our mental athletes, those that are trying to remember the names and faces of people. We give them over 125 names that they've got to use in 15 minutes to retain and recall them. We give them strings of 500-digit numbers. We have poems that we give them, and we give them a tea party event where we bring guests out. So we give them a number of different challenges, and as I read through what was being reported here in this Harvard newsletter, it became clear that what they're doing, what we've been teaching, is appropriate, because the doc here that's doing the study from behavioral neurology area comes back and says, to reactivate a memory, you must think about the senses that were engaged as the memory was being recorded. Now, senses, a lot of times we talk about senses are our sight, what we see, what we hear, what we touch, what we taste, what we smell. Now, you're sitting here looking at a competition and you're seeing things along. Well, now you've got our tea party event that clearly utilizes multiple senses. You're looking at a person, you're hearing that person, and you may be jotting down some notes or seeing something that's written about that person, and you now have to engage those senses to cue your brain to be able to extract it when you go back into the recall and they come back out, and you got to remember their name and their phone number and their address and hobbies. So what are the cues that you've stored in your brain to facilitate the ability to then pull that information back out in what we call the USA Memory Championship? So here's what the report says. You must think about the senses that were engaged as the memory was being recorded. So as you were engaged in this sense of retaining something and encoding it, did you use your touch, the sense of smell? Did you touch something? Did you grab on? So we see action verbs when people are trying to retain, and they create imagery in their brains. Are those images moving in their mind and how they go about it? When they're retaining in the words list, we give them a couple of hundred words and 15 minutes to retain as many as possible. Are they physically motioning things and putting action videos, like little cells in their brain, like comic cells, I meant by that. That's because as you experience something, your imagery, sounds, smells, taste, touch, thoughts, and feelings are being stored in your cortex. So this goes on to say, so as you see things, as you hear them, as you smell them, as you taste them, as you touch them, generating thoughts and emotions, that is stored in the cortex, in the brain. And they're all pulled together in what they describe here as the hippocampus. And it's those lobes in the brain that retrieve the information at a later point in time. So what you need to be thinking about is, as you're encoding information, what senses are you using? If you truly want to retain it, are you using imagery and imagination? Are you making a sound of something? Maybe you're even walking and talking and trying to encode something. There are things sometimes when I'm practicing for a presentation, I actually will look at the slides, but I'll verbalize those slides because it then encodes my brain to, as I was looking and I was talking, how did that come out? And so when I now take the notes away and I'm in front of a group of people, I can see the slide, but I think about what I was talking about the last time through and what were the key points that I wanted to make. So I use a couple of these different cueing techniques to be able to stand up in front of a room of people and sound and look like I know what I'm doing. I'm using all of the things that we teach in the Maximum Memory Mastery online course, which of course we've learned through years of conducting the USA Memory Championship and seeing people from different walks of life, from 12 years old to 72 years old, compete to see who's got the best memory, and then being able to talk to them and learn what did they do to be so good at becoming a mental athlete. So here are some cues. And this is what the Research Institute says: because you may not spontaneously recall cues in your memory, you may have to generate some. So you might need some techniques and skills to help. And if I just started thinking of what we were just talking about, which is the encoding using our senses, well, what would a picture look like? So let's go back and look at photographs. All right, so we give you pictures of people. Now we give you a picture. Let's retain and recall that picture. Let's think about, well, when did we take that picture? Where were we when that picture or photograph was taken? We have a technique called the Roman room. We have people picture a room in their residence, and maybe if they want to remember a whole lot of information, picture multiple rooms in a residence and image the objects in that room so that as you go back through each of those objects, you're cueing your brain to think of what you connected and linked to those objects. How about going back and reading something that you wrote or something that you thought you remembered very well, or maybe it was a poem that you remembered years ago or a letter that you had wrote? How many times have you seen people read back letters that in the older days, God, I remember my mom was writing letters. I remember in my younger days, I was always thinking about writing letters to the people that I cared most about, and thank you cards and different recognition things that highlight events. And going back and things I've received, and I go back and I look at that file and open it up, and I can just put myself right back into that space of what I was doing and how I was doing it. Maybe it's an article of clothing. If you're one of the folks that don't have a regular annual habit of cleaning out your closets and you save some of your clothing. I mean, Halloween parties are great for this. You go look and see the different costumes that people put on. I love watching Let's Make a Deal because you see all these people with these different costumes, which provokes memories of costumes and things that you did and clothing that you wore maybe at a younger age or whatever age it is. And so what did you wear to that event? And how were you received by it? And what did people have to say? And maybe it's a suit, maybe it's a business suit. I always remember I wear a tie at my annual memory champions when we're doing live, the championships, and I do it live. I wear a tie with a seahorse. And every time I look at that tie with a seahorse, I can almost see myself standing on a stage and introducing the USA Memory Championship and the mental athletes. So maybe it's an article of clothing that you wear that you personally save. It could be a piece of jewelry, a ring or a pair of earrings, something that you utilize to generate and hit your encoded part of your brain. Listen to it also. Oh God, the songs. Does music not engage us into when did we first hear that song? You go to oldies, they have 50s and 60s and 70s. Boy, if I listen to country music, I think of my mom. She used to love that when we were growing up and we'd have lunch or breakfast or dinner. She'd have a country music station on a very little old. I could see the front of the radio and the sides of it, just a plain old radio playing country and western songs. And boy, if I hear an Eddie Arnold song, for example, boy, am I giving things away here. Boy, do I think of Mom like right away in terms of that. So music, and think of any song that you've ever listened and hear to. I bet you can almost put when you first heard it or something that was romantic or significant about it. Maybe it's something you're eating, right? And how often do you have people over and you make a meal and you think about, well, I learned this recipe from my grandmother, or I learned this recipe from my mom, and this is what she would make for Easter or the holidays, and this is the desserts that we would have. And boy, do those things just carry forward memories and the ability to go back and remember things that happened and put you back into those moments and enable you to have recall. So what's the point? I guess I could keep going here. I just watch an old TV show. God, I'm watching old TV shows right now. I'm picking up some of the older shows that I used to watch, and I just love them. And I just think they're fantastic. But the point of the matter is, though, an old TV show. I love watching the Perry Mason show. So Perry Mason's one of them. Columbo was another one that I love to go back and watch. And boy, I can see where I was. Bonanza was one of my Sunday night favorites. So those are just a few. But my point is, as you are in a mode in the present, knowing what these cues are and these tips, then what you'd want to be able to do is take a snapshot of it. And I say a snapshot, you know what? You can be intentional in snapshotting it without a camera. Maybe you want to talk about it, and you might want to converse, and you know, sometimes you can converse with yourself. It doesn't make you crazy by verbalizing it. I know I went swimming today, and if, people look at me like, who are you talking to in the pool? My other half says, so who are you talking to? I'm talking, and as I'm doing my laps back and forth, on what lap I do. I did 30 laps in the pool today. It was almost half a mile of swimming in the pool, and I do it on my back. So I'm up. I'm not talking into the water. I'm talking up into the sky. And she's like, "Who are you talking to?" Well, what I'm doing is making stories as I'm going back and forth, so I remember how many laps have I swam, and this way I don't lose count and just keep swimming into the moonlight of the evening. So what are some of the things that you're doing in the present that you can deliver with? Maybe you've gone out and bought a special piece of clothing for a special celebration, a graduation or a wedding or a birthday or some fair. And this special piece of clothing will lock you into the events of that night or afternoon or lunch, and you'll just always, always remember that. Maybe it's a dessert. Maybe it's something go out and have dessert. I know I'd love to take the grandkids to Cold Stone Creamery. And boy, we could sit there and we go reminisce the last time we were there, the time before. How about in the present? We're trying to remember something. So what can we do in the present to lock it in and make it unique that will be memorable? And my lesson to you there is, it's in the present that you begin to think about how you're going to lock things into your memory using your sights, your hearing, your imagery, your senses, that then help to encode, as we've learned here from this Harvard medical letter. It's how we encode these things into our brain and utilizing senses, making links and connections, associations that then build stories around emotion and thoughts, imagination, that really help us to create the associations, links, and connections that in the future we'll almost be able to pull out with 100% of being back in those moments. So that concludes what I wanted to cover in the current issue of the Harvard Health Letter. And off we go for the weekend. Those of you into the NCAA brackets, heavy schedule of games on Saturday, Sunday, and that'll take us from the Sweet 16 into the Elite 8 and the Final Four on Monday and Tuesday. So enjoy your next 4 days if you're a basketball fan and you've got teams and folks that you want to see win in those games. Unfortunately, by the time we start, if we've got 16, we're coming out with 4. That means there are 10, 12 schools that didn't do as well, but you know what? They got there, and that's the important thing when you see the hundreds of people that compete across the country. So have a good weekend, enjoy your games, and we'll see you in the Monday night hour.